Welcome back, everybody. We're working on a Unity tutorial, and we're really close to the end. What we're going to do is we're going to take this level out here, and we're going to add some dangerous objects. We're going to add two items that, I can't even speak today, two items that are in the provided folder. And under provided, you're going to go to the prefabs. You're going to see spike and free range spiker. And if we impale ourselves upon our spike, then we're going to disable the player and basically trigger the game over function method. And that'll restart the game. Same thing happens with the free range spiker. The only difference is the free range spiker is going to come after us. So let's talk about how to do a little bit of scripting, a little bit of configuring, and talk about how we're going to do it. Let's start easy. Let's go with the spike. I'm going to jump in here. I already have a level I have here, and I've got a platform, and my player's right above. So what I'm thinking of doing is just dragging the spike, first of all, into the prefabs folder because we want to move it out of provided. When we're totally done, it's probably a good idea to just delete the provided folder if everything's being used. So I drag it over, prefab. Now I have the spike in the prefab. And I don't think I have any scripts for the spike. So we're going to just work on our player controller. So we'll go to the prefabs, and let's just drag the spike out onto the stage. And then we're going to take a look at a couple things here. On the spike, we want to look at its position. Z is 0, so that's good. Let's zoom in a little bit. Make sure it's positioned about right. I'm going to get the move tool here and move it up just a little bit. I don't want it hovering. I want to be able to basically see there's an overlap. Looks good to me. We got the spike here. Let's go ahead and test it out. Actually, before we test it out, we do have to do a little bit of code. First of all, we have the spike here. Notice there's a capsule-looking green collider. That's using a capsule collider. And when we collide with that, it's going to trigger a game over event. So the first thing we want to do is we want to look at the spike. I don't know if you have this tag or not, but if it does have an obstacle tag, just check it. If you don't see a tag called obstacle, click add tag, click the plus sign here and add it in. All right, now we're not going to add it, but if you don't have it, you add it here. Then you go back anywhere. I would just, once I added it, I would then click on the spike, and then I'd make sure that it has the obstacle tag selected. So make sure you tag that. All right, so at this point, that's tagged. Now we know we have a tag of obstacle. We know it has a collider that's a trigger collider. So we're going to go to our player, and we're going to double-click on the player controller, and we need to add a variable to capture the tag. And then we need to decide what happens when we collide with it. And everything's pretty much in place, just a couple minor changes. So you go up to the top where we have all of our tags right after the finish tag. I'm just going to write in here, just make it public, string, oh, not static, string. And then it's just obstacle tag. The cool thing about this tag is that we can add this obstacle tag to other obstacles that would cause a game over event. So it's the void on trigger enter. So we're going to use what we did with compare tag on other ones. Same thing goes here. If, and it's other, other dot, and then it's game object dot compare tag. And then it's the obstacle tag. So once you type out enough of it, you'll see it's highlighted. Just hit enter. Okay, so when we collide with the obstacle tag, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do the GM, that's the game manager, hit a dot. You will notice down a little bit here, you'll see game over. This is a method, game over. If you hover over here, you can see you had to add those little parentheses. So we add those, semicolon, bam, we got it. Save your changes. Don't forget to save changes. Otherwise, it won't work. And we want to click on here on our player controller script. It's going to pop open any moment now. Sometimes you have to click it to sort of trigger that. Pause the video while we wait. Okay, there it is, obstacle tag. So you just write obstacle, just like you did when you created that tag or added it. And let's go ahead and test it out. So when we collide with it, oh, there's one other thing we need to do, but let's just go ahead and test this out anyway. You'll notice the ball is still moving. That seems wrong. So what we're going to do is we're going to set the player to just sort of disappear. And it's the set active. Remember we did this with the pickup? So we're going to do the same thing where we had the other .game object set active to false. Well, this time it's not the other object, it's ourselves. So we're just going to copy that. And if what we want to do is right before we end the game, we just do game object.set active false, save your changes, go back to the scene and test it out. And then let's see if it works. So it should just disappear the moment it hits the spike. Yep, there we go. Okay, so we got that working. We have the spike working. Let's get our free range spiker in play. And this is going to be a little more interesting. So let's talk a little bit about the behavior of it before we actually code it. What we want to do is we want to have this enemy that we're going to do a little AI, a little artificial intelligence. We're going to pretend this enemy can't quite see us because we're not close enough to be seen. But once we're within a certain range, it comes after us. There's many ways we can accomplish this. We can accomplish this with code. What we're going to do is we're going to create a trigger collider for the player. And basically, the moment the other object collides with what we're going to call the perimeter, it's then going to trigger that it can move towards us. So we need to create a perimeter, and we're going to do that through the player. So you want to go to the hierarchy where you have the player. You want to right-click on it. And then you're going to create a 3D sphere. And when we click it, first of all, if you look at this particular sphere, it has a scale of 1, 1, 1. If I click the sphere and you select it, it should have that same scale. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the sphere collider. All right, we're going to hide. Let's go ahead and open it. And we're going to expand this. You'll notice the radius is 0.5 because that's from the center out, as opposed to the scale, which is the full size. We're going to make this sphere collider a trigger, and we're going to change the scale to 15, and we'll zoom out so you can sort of see the size of it. And then we're going to get rid of the mesh renderer. We don't need it to render, so we just remove that so we can't see it. And what we're going to do is we're going to add a couple other components. First of all, it's no longer a sphere, it's our perimeter, so we want to rename that. So we rename it to perimeter, like so. Okay, and we're going to tag it as perimeter, and we don't have that as a tag yet. So we click where it says untagged. We're going to add the tag, and we're going to just click the plus sign and type perimeter. Say little p, you'll notice. And then I click perimeter, and then under tag, I check perimeter. All right, so we've set the trigger, we've removed the mesh renderer, we've changed the radius, we've added a tag. We're going to add a rigid body to this. So type RIG, rigid body. I'm going to expand this, and we're going to uncheck use gravity because we don't want this to add to the gravity. We're going to check is kinematic. All right, it's very important we add those two pieces. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure why we're doing it. It's in the tutorial, but I found one little hint that may or may not relate. Don't know. And it's the documentation on rigid body. It does say if you are moving a game object through its transform component, and they say not to do a transform and a rigid body, but if you're moving it through its transform component, but you want to receive collision trigger messages, you must attach a rigid body to the object that is moving. So that might be what's going on. That's the best I can tell from my research. Don't worry about it. Just do it. It works. Maybe it's an extra step you didn't need to do. Sorry. But we're just going to go ahead and try it. All right, so we've got all of that in place. We added our rigid body. We unchecked use gravity. We checked is kinematic. We have our perimeter. It has a tag. It is all ready to go. I'm going to zoom out, and what we want now is to grab the prefab, which is the free range spiker. So I'm going to drag that out onto our prefabs folder, the one with the capital P that's not in the provided folder. And then let's click on scripts because it's going to use two different scripts, free range controller and vulnerability. Vulnerability we're going to use, but we're not going to actually edit it. So maybe we'll take a look if we have time. I'm going to grab this and drag it over to scripts. Let go. I'm going to do the same thing with vulnerability. let it go. And then I'm going to look at scripts because I want to see if we have rotate in here. Yeah, I did this at one point. I'm going to click on assets itself, and we're going to scroll down, try to ignore creepy doll. I'm going to drag this rotate script into the scripts folder. Wow, it's kind of, this happens sometimes. I'm having some trouble with it. Okay, so I had a little crash there and I had to redo this. So yeah, I'd moved rotate back into script. So now they're in script. So everything should be good. We're ready to go. Let's do this. Let's drag out our free range spiker. Okay, so let's get our prefab. Let's get our free range spiker and drag it out onto the scene. And we're going to put it outside of the perimeter. Notice it has a collider that's pretty big outside of it too. So you want to see like roughly, well, let's take a look right where my mouse is, right between those clouds, take a look in the perimeter. There's still some space in between it, right? So we'll still have to move to the right before we trigger it. But not everything's set up just yet. So first of all, let's look at the free range spiker. It's way up here. I just want to point out just a couple things. You'll see it has a free range controller. And you saw that vulnerability one. It goes to this vulnerability object, which is this part here. So this part is vulnerable. It has this script called vulnerability controller, and we're not actually going to touch it. It's like there. And so let's just take a look at the vulnerability so that we don't, I just want to at least do this. Right here it says, game object transform parent. Now the parent is the parent of the object. That would be notice that this is tabbed over, vulnerability under free range spiker. The parent is the full object. So sometimes you have this part, which is a component making up the full object, and you need to target something to the parent. And we have a to-do make a blow-up particle effect to instantiate when this object dies. And there's a bunch of cool tutorials out there. I'm going to recommend one in particular by Brackies, and I'll just show you real quick. So here's this tutorial. I'm going to go ahead and run it.
In this explosive video, we're going to create some bombs and grenades in Unity. Towards the end, it should look something like this. Let's just jump.
Okay, so that's the tutorial, grenade/bomb in Unity by Brackies. Very excellent series on Unity development. Highly recommend you check it out. We're not going to do that, but if you want to learn how, this is where you're going to tap into that. Okay, so let's go to the free range spiker object, and it has the free range controller. Let's take a look at it and see what we have available and how we're going to target this. First of all, we have some public strings that are public variables that allow us to configure and work with other objects. Notice the perimeter tags. We are going to take a use of the perimeter tags. We're going to use a collider. And we're also making the player public, and then we're creating a variable called speed, which will determine how fast it moves. And so these are all things you need to know. And then we're going to target our own rigid body called MRB, just like we did with the player. And we have this to-do list for our script. So we need to update the velocity of the rigid body of the free range spiker to be the direction times the speed. And remember, velocity is a vector in that it is both distance or magnitude and direction. So the direction is which way it's pointing, and speed is how far it moves along that line. And in order to do that, we're going to make use of vector 3 once again, where the whole vector is to get the direction we need to go. We're going to take the player object and subtract our current position to get it. We're going to do a thing called normalize. I'll explain it once I code it. And then we're going to set the velocity. I'm going to leave these comments all right here. And so the other thing I want to point out is it already has an on trigger enter, and it calls when you collide with a perimeter. We're going to begin moving to the player, and that's what this is all about. So like I said, the first thing we want to do is we want to get the direction, and this is a vector 3. So I'm going to do vector 3 because it has an X and a Y and a Z. We need all three to point. And then we're going to get the player's position, and we already have a variable, vector 3 direction. Have to set that variable equals. Now we're going to type player dot, and then we're going to get the transform dot position. Okay, so this is going to be an XYZ of the actual location of our player. and we're going to, from this number, we're going to subtract our own position. And we have our own transform, and so we just don't have to precede it with anything. So we just type transform dot position. Okay, so this gives us a direction. And it's basically the direction is not only where we're pointing, but right now it's like all the way to our player. And we don't want to go all the way. We want to go in, we want to advance in the speed of speed. I know that sounds kind of funny. We're going to take direction and we're going to normalize it. And what it means to normalize is something you do with vectors. It's going to take the vector, keep the orientation and the direction it's facing, and it's going to change the magnitude to 1. So once we have the speed, we multiply the speed by 1, and so we'll go at the speed we set it to in the direction of pointing towards the player. I hope that makes sense. I think this is as close as I'm going to get to making sense on this as I can. To normalize, we're going to call vector 3 the object itself. It has what's called a static method. And a static method is a method attached to the class, not a specific object. So vector 3 dot, and it's normalize, and there it is. It's type n, we got it. We need to give it a vector value. So in this case, it's a vector 3, and that's actually direction. So we're taking direction, and we're normalizing it. So we say, all right, change the magnitude from whatever it is to 1, so that now we can multiply it by speed. But what we're going to do is we're going to set the velocity of the rigid body of the, I can't even remember the name of it, the free range spiker. So we're going to put the rigid body dot velocity equals, and we're going to set it to direction times speed. All right, there we go. So, and by the way, just in case you were wondering, we do this to the rigid body because velocity is a physics item. It'll behave better than targeting the transform. Save your changes. Save. All right, let's test it. If it works, we can change the to-do into a did-do. Is done something. I'm going to go back here. I'm going to save my changes. Don't want to forget to save changes. Also, I want to make sure I save changes to the script. It looks like I did. So I'm going to go back to Unity. The fact that it didn't open up means I'm still having trouble with my computer in Unity. So it probably froze. If all of a sudden things look weird, it's because I had to restart Unity. Okay, Unity is frozen. I actually had to hide the script, but I just want to point out that it currently, if you look at the free range controller script, it doesn't have the perimeter set and it doesn't have the player set. So you're going to actually just type in perimeter, the tag, and you're just going to click on the player and drag it in and test it. So I have to actually restart Unity. Hopefully I can restart without it crashing, so stay tuned. All right, I did have to restart it. I'm going to type perimeter. And I'm going to drag the player object over. And then I'm going to save my changes to the scene lest it crash again. And we're going to test it out. So at this point, nothing should happen until I move to the right. Nothing, nothing, nothing. Move to the right, jump, and here it comes. There we go. Now, right now it comes after me, but now let's see what happens. Yeah, see, it goes back. So I have to just see if I can jump around. All right, at this point, let's go ahead and stop that. I hit the spike that ended it. Let's just see if it works where and it collides. I hate to say this, I want the object to die. I know, it sounds so brutal, but here we go. Just want to make sure. It's going to die. I had one job. One job. I had to have it survive. Couldn't even do that. There you go. And bam, game over. Great, that works. Let's do one other little piece here. Let's add the rotate script to the free range spiker. So we're going to click add component, and then I'm going to type RO for rotate, click rotate. And let's just do a couple configurations. I'll put 100 here for X, 0 for Y, 0 for Z. Save my changes. That's the key. And then watch the rotate of the x-axis. There are 3 ways it can rotate. And so that's rotating x. Let's take a look at rotating y. And of course, you can do any combination. It doesn't have to be that number. 100 was enough to get it moving pretty fast. I just wanted to see that so that we've got that. So that's Y. And then let's do finally Z. And you get to choose if you want one or all of these. So I go over to Z, 100. That's probably the first way you thought it was going to rotate. Sometimes it's hard to know which way things are going to rotate until you test it out. So that's why I'm testing it out. And here we go, and that's the Z. Oh, flat out missed me. Okay, there we go. So you can also see what it looks like for all three of them. Let's just do that. And I think we're pretty much done. As you can see, this is working. Save for changes. If you're using GitHub version control, it's time to commit your changes once you've tested it and you see it working. And there we go. So in my next tutorial, we're going to start talking about building out your scenes, using that game manager to sort of develop it out. So stay tuned for that. Looking forward to it. And thanks for watching.